Mandatory minicamp for the Saints started this Tuesday, which means we saw a lot of familiar faces back in New Orleans, and that's a good thing, whether it was Alvin Kamara, Marshawn Lattimore, Taysom Hill. We'll talk about all that was there, what it means for New Orleans, some interesting facts, all that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Houdat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. And this program is brought to you by Scott McNair Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott McNair handles it all. You can give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. And the New Orleans Saints had great stuff to talk about this Tuesday, whether it was Derek Carr at the podium, some chats, whether it's seeing an Alvin Kamara workout video, whether it's seeing Taysom Hill out there getting some movement in, Marshawn Lattimore making some plays, Michael Thomas making some plays. Look, the whole team's not at 100% yet. I think that will be something that hopefully happens when training camp rolls around in late July, but seeing Alvin out there on the field is a plus, seeing Marshawn on the field is a plus, seeing Taysom on the field obviously is a plus, and we'll go through all of them, but let's start off with maybe the biggest name there, and obviously that is Alvin Kamara. Wasn't there for OTAs. Now that it is mandatory minicamp, everyone that needed to be there was there for the New Orleans Saints, which is exactly what you want. You don't want a situation like, let's say, with the Bills, where there's conflicting reports about Stephon Diggs being there and whether or not the team's concerned and what's the problem at hand. There's none of that for New Orleans, which is obviously a good thing. But to know that not just are these big names present, they're making an impact, that's important. And you see that with Alvin on the field. You see that with Lattimore on the field. I saw a couple of reports. Nick Underhill mentioned that Lattimore, as he gets older, you kind of feel like he's taking that maybe transition into not just being a great player, but being a good leader. And I think that's maybe something we didn't see early in his career, but the fact that we might see that now, paired with him being an elite player, I'm excited to see that. Derek Carr raved about him during his press conference today, talked about how hard it is to go up against a guy like that, whether you're, teammates or opponents. He's just such a talented cornerback. So some praise there from Derek Carr. That's not the only person that Derek Carr praised, though. He praised Alvin's route running. He actually said, when he was talking about it to the media, said that's not normal. And this is why they're going through drills. And as that's going on, Derek's looking at Jake Haener, the rookie quarterback from Fresno State, and he's saying that's just not normal what Alvin's able to do. And he talked about his fluidity and just the way he's so smooth when he's out there. And I think that's something that us Saints fans have all kind of agreed on. Alvin's the type of player since his rookie year. You can tell he was special. And I think that the New Orleans Saints roster, and this isn't just fans, I mean, these are actual players on the team, they see that too. I think it's pretty cool, in my opinion. And I think for Alvin, it's a good sign that he still seems to be that guy that he was then, because I think for him, there's a really big discussion. And I think a lot of it actually is fantasy football driven, if I'm being quite honest, where it's like, is Alvin still good? Is he still elite? Is he capable of being the number one option in the backfield at this stage in his career? And I think the answer is still yes to all of those questions. But I think we live now in a time where everyone's worried about fantasy football numbers, right? How many touchdowns do you have? How many yards do you have? And that really, really, really sparks and drives the narrative about how good were you on the football field. And I think that for Alvin, don't get me wrong, I'll go into his numbers in a second. I think a lot of it is cause for concern about how the offense used him, not so much how he is. But because he wasn't a touchdown machine last year, you really didn't hear much about him. And if anything, when you heard about him, it was more so criticism. And not every year is going to be like 2020 when he had 16 rushing touchdowns. It's just not. Now, last year was the polar opposite of it, right? Only 2 rushing touchdowns, which was a career low, and that's not what you want. The average yards per carry was a second lowest in his career. Receiving yards, second lowest in his career, I believe. Targets, second lowest. Receptions, second lowest. So all those numbers I mentioned, yes, they are down. And I get why the questions come up. But I think the questions come up because people kind of sit there on their phones or computers, whatever, and you're checking your stats for your fantasy football team as the season goes along, and they're not up to par as to what you want as a fan when you drafted him. That said, people who watched the Saints games last year, there was one game in particular. Now, there were more than one, but there's one in particular that I thought the Saints used Alvin the best way possible. And that was against the Raiders. And he delivered. I mean, I think he had 3 touchdowns in that game, was a menace receiving the ball, was great rushing. But that was kind of it in my opinion. Like, yes, he had a good game against Atlanta towards the end of the year. Thought he had a good game against Philly, I believe. I thought he was good against Cleveland in that really, really rigid game with those freezing temperatures. But I thought those were Alvin being Alvin, like making something out of nothing. Whereas the Raiders game, it felt like how he's supposed to, right? 15 plus carries, 10 catches. I mean, that's a great game. I'm not saying he needs to have that type of usage, but I never felt like he was featured in the passing game other than that game against the Raiders. And I think for Alvin, you can kind of see that. And I think there is frustration. So when I hear Derek Carr say that his route running is not normal and that he was just amazed kind of watching him, well, I love to hear that. And it makes me feel like Derek Carr is going to want to throw the football to Alvin. It's on Pete Carmichael to make sure that the offense puts Alvin in a position to be a viable option for his quarterback. Because, man, if we just look at the numbers real quick, the first 3 seasons, it's crazy. It always blows my mind. But the first 3 seasons of Alvin's career, he had 81 receptions in each of those 3 seasons. Then in 2020, he had 83. Since then, he's had 47 catches in 2021, 57 catches in 2022. Now, I'm not saying Alvin needs to catch the ball 80 plus times. I'm not asking for that. But good Lord, the amount of targets he gets now compared to back then, way too low. And this is an NFL that plays 17 games now, not 16. It's way too low. He should not have 77 targets in a 17 game season when he used to have 100 plus in a 16 game season. That's just how I see it. So I'm encouraged that Derek Carr really has, I would say, a fondness for Alvin's game, and already in Alvin's first practice back sees that wow factor. But Derek's not the one who's going to be calling the plays. It's going to be Pete Carmichael, and it's on Pete Carmichael to make sure number 41 gets utilized in the way that he's supposed to get utilized. So fingers crossed that's what happens. But when I see that quote, it kind of, to me, I see it as a reminder like Alvin still is that dude. Does his offensive coordinator know how to use that dude, though? And that's the question I have. But again, great sign to see Alvin out there. That certainly makes me happy. The second thing that I wanted to talk about, not going to keep it too lengthy here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, I want to talk about Taysom Hill. Wasn't there for OTAs. I think that was really more so because he just had his second child. Obviously, for him, you can kind of use that almost like a paternity leave in the sense that OTAs are not mandatory. And I think Taysom Hill's been around the Saints long enough that if he misses 2-3 weeks of OTAs, you're really not going to lose sleep or bat an eye over it, because we've seen him come in and do his job time in, time out. So I think for Taysom, getting him out there was great. It was more so the questions about how is he going to be used, right? I know a lot of Saints fans want to see him used strictly as a tight end. I know people like myself think that he still needs to be used in all roles possible, especially running the football out from the quarterback position, because my thought is he averaged 6 yards per carry last year. Until teams show you that they could stop it and make that number go significantly down where it feels like you're kind of wasting snaps with Taysom, I think you kind of run that thing until it doesn't work. That said, New Orleans today, their coaching staff used him at QB, tight end, and he got some special team snaps. I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't think Taysom Hill at tight end is going to need to be utilized that heavily if Foster Moreau is ready to go, because Juwan Johnson is going to be that receiving tight end that you have, and I think Foster can be a little bit of both. Run game, pass game, can do it all. Quarterback, obviously with Derek Carr, you're hoping he's there for all 17 games, which means you probably don't ask Taysom Hill to take that many snaps under center. Because I'm going to be honest, I thought there were points last year where I just wanted to see Taysom more than Andy Dalton. And again, I'm not trying to throw shade at Andy Dalton, but the offense was so lethargic at times that you just felt like, all right, let Taysom just run it the rest of the game and hope it works. And I think with Derek now, you don't want it to be that case. If it ever gets to that point, then obviously that's not great. So maybe you don't see him as much at QB. But again, special teams, we've seen him deliver in the past, both blocking punts and also being a return man. We've seen him deliver at QB from the running type of aspect of it in terms of QB power, even the option. So I still hope they do that. And the fact that he was out there today is great. Saints reporters talked about him leading a couple of drives. That's obviously good news because, again, the Saints have had such crap luck at quarterback in terms of injuries that it kind of makes sense for him to get out there, right? I mean, Jameis has gotten hurt. Trevor Siemian got hurt. Taysom got hurt. I'm just thinking along the lines, even Breeze at the end of his career was getting hurt every single season at that point. 2019, 2020, he dealt with a lot of injuries. So I think for New Orleans, Taysom in a multitude of roles makes a lot of sense to me. I think that is something that people shouldn't really get concerned over. And I think for Taysom, again, he's a rare weapon. And some weeks, maybe the game plan doesn't call for a lot of him. And other weeks, maybe the game plan calls for a lot of Taysom, and that, I'd say, dosage of him leads to victories. And I've talked about it before on here multiple times. A lot of the games the Saints won last year, Taysom Hill played well. So I'm excited to see what happens with him. But overall, early thoughts for mandatory minicamp, still not a ton, I'd say, to digest at the moment. But Marshawn being back, Alvin being back, and Taysom being back certainly bodes well for the Saints. They're obviously a much better team with those three guys out there on the field, and I'm excited to see how this unfolds. But mandatory minicamp is going to be rolling through for the rest of this week. Hopefully, we get some more good news from the Saints. Obviously, the only bad news was Rashid Shaheed's groin injury, but it sounds like it's minor. So that allows us to kind of, have a sigh of relief. And then the only other different news, which isn't injury related and it's not player related, it's actually coaching related. Ted Ginn Jr. helping out the coaching staff. We'll see if that leads to something. For now, it kind of seems like I don't want to say a one-off, but it kind of seems like this is just a trial base type of stint for him. But who knows? Maybe it leads to big things. And I think that'd be pretty cool for Ted Ginn Jr. for him to offer some of his expertise to the Saints in a coaching role now that he's done playing. So we'll kind of see how that all unfolds in New Orleans. But until then, guys, that's going to do it for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. So make sure to subscribe to Boo Crew Media's YouTube page for more content like this. And as always, stay tuned here for more content from the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for